Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany. My name is Peggy Sherman and I'm the Service Associate today. Before we begin, please check to make sure your microphone is muted. You can also turn your camera off if your image is potentially distracting or embarrassing. Please also be mindful of your speech while on Zoom, as microphones can accidentally become unmuted. This will minimize any disruption of our service. Thanks so much for your cooperation. This is now the time of transition from ordinary time to sacred time. Let this be for you a quiet place away from the din. May this virtual space be your sanctuary for the next hour. Zoom will present to you a frame for this space to hold the representations, sound, music, the songs, poetry, and prose, to lift your heart, broaden your mind, and move you to do justice in the world in the service of building beloved community. While we cannot be physically present together this morning, may this virtual service be holy and sacred time for each of us as we join together in the celebration of life. Our prelude is Ebony. Please join in the chalice lighting words shown on the screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. Our opening song is We Gather Together, with music by Adrian Valerius and words by Dorothy and Robert Sengus. Please join in singing, led by Elena Karpoff. Welcome to our viewers from Facebook who are joining us now for our service. This morning, we welcome Janice Gallagher to our pulpit. Janice is an assistant professor of political science at Rutgers University, Newark, with a PhD in government from Cornell and an MA in teaching from Brown. She is about to submit her first manuscript for publication. Janice grew up in our congregation, and we are delighted to have her back with us at Albany UU.
Thank you so much, Peggy, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to speak with all of you after what has been an unusual and challenging year. I feel like I'm perhaps not the most likely person to be here given that I'm a political scientist. But it's been a year where politics I know has affected the well-being of so many of us, and I am just really grateful for the time to speak with all of you. So today I want to talk about what the increased silence and solitude has meant for so many of us. In a time when so many of us have had more time to be alone, I want to focus today on the ways in which being still, being forced into flexibility, having time cleared for reflection, and being presented with more opportunities than we could care for to grieve, to miss, and to fear, have given and will continue to give us opportunities to readjust, to reevaluate, and even to more deliberately love ourselves and those we are closest to. So the challenge for today for all of us, including myself, is to search for the opportunities hidden within all this stillness and suffering, and to articulate the hope that lies within the opportunities for ourselves and for our world, and to intentionally bring our yearning for loving connections and community to fruition. So with that, I'm going to start with a reading from Bell Hooks from a 2000 book called All About Love. As some of you may know, Bell Hooks is a renowned Black feminist scholar, and I thought it was really interesting that one of her most resonant books centered on love. So I'll be talking about her today, and I wanted to start with this reading. Love redeems. Despite all the lovelessness that surrounds us, nothing has been able to block our longing for love, the intensity of our yearning. The understanding that love redeems appears to be a resilient aspect of the heart's knowledge. The healing power of redemptive love lures us and calls us toward the possibility of healing. We cannot account for the presence of the heart's knowledge. Like all great mysteries, we are all mysteriously called to love, no matter the condition of our lives, the degree of our depravity or despair. The persistence of this call gives us reason to hope. Without hope, we cannot return to love. Breaking our sense of isolation and opening up the window of opportunity, hope provides us with a reason to go forward. It is a practice of positive thinking. Being positive, living in a permanent state of hopefulness, renews the spirit, renewing our faith in love's promise. Hope is our covenant. She says, I began thinking and writing about love when I heard cynicism instead of hope in the voices of young and old. Cynicism is the greatest barrier to love. It is rooted in doubt and despair. Fear intensifies our doubt. It paralyzes. Faith and hope allow us to let fear go. Fear stands in the way of love. When we take to heart the biblical insistence that there is no fear in love, we understand the necessity of choosing courageous thought and action. The scripture encourages us to find comfort in knowing that perfect love casts out fear. This is our reminder that even if fear exists, it can be released by the experience of perfect love. The alchemy of perfect love is such that it offers to us all a love that is able to vanquish fear. That which is rendered separate or strange through fear is made whole through perfect love. It is this perfect love that is redemptive, that can, like the intense heat of alchemical fire, burn away impurities and leave the soul free. Significantly, we are told in biblical scripture that it is crucial that love casts out fear because fear hath torment. These words speak directly to the presence of anguish in our lives when we are driven by fear. The practice of loving is the healing force that brings sustained peace. It is the practice of love that transforms. As one gives and receives love, fear is let go. As we live the understanding that there is no fear in love, our anguish diminishes and we garner the strength to enter more deeply into love's paradise. When we're able to accept that giving ourselves over to love completely restores the soul, we are made perfect in love. The transformative power of love is not fully embraced in our society because we often wrongly believe that torment and anguish are our natural condition. This assumption seems to be affirmed by the ongoing tragedy that prevails in modern society. In a world anguished by rampant destruction, fear prevails. When we love, we no longer allow our hearts to be held captive by fear. The desire to be powerful is rooted in the intensity of fear. Power gives us the illusion of having triumphed over fear, over our need for love. To return to love, to know perfect love, we surrender the will to power. It is this revelation that makes the scriptures on perfect love so prophetic and revolutionary for our times. We cannot know love if we remain unable to surrender our attachment to power. If any feelings of vulnerability strikes terror in our hearts, lovelessness torments. As our cultural awareness of the ways we are seduced away from love, away from the knowledge that love heals, gains recognition, our anguish intensifies. But so does our yearning. The space of our lack is also the space of possibility. I'll say that again. The space of our lack is also the space of possibility. As we yearn, we make ourselves ready to receive the love that is coming to us as gift, as promise, as earthly paradise. Thank you. Now, I think non-traditionally, I'm going to offer a song, which I learned in protest, at a protest. So there's many iterations out there, but this is the one that I was taught by others struggling for a better world. It's called I'm Going Through. I'm going through. I'm going through. I don't care what the rest of the world decides to do. I made up my mind, and I ain't gonna turn around, 'cause I'm walking with my freedom, and I'm gonna go through. If anybody knows this, some might, please join me. I'll do it one more time. I'm going through. I'm going through. I don't care what the rest of the world decides to do. I made up my mind, and I ain't gonna turn around, 'cause I'm walking with my freedom, and I'm gonna go through. Let us enter into a period of silent meditation. So this year, we have certainly all had the opportunity to go through, whether we're frontline workers, we are newly isolated in our retirement, whether we are parents and extended family members and caregivers doing more with less time and resources than we ever imagined, whether we're part of the newly unemployed or the newly professionally isolated, we have all gone through it this year. We have suffered in some way, we've had our lives disrupted, and we have yearned for what was during the before. The through lines of this suffering, disruption, and yearning is more stillness, is this more time spent alone and more separation from other people who we may have grown accustomed to bringing love into our daily lives. So today I want to talk about this suffering as opportunity, this disruption as a change agent, and this yearning as an impetus. So I'm going to draw today from a course I taught this semester, and I'm borrowing some words from my students. So the course was aimed at students finishing their master's in political science at Rutgers University, Newark, where I teach, which is the most diverse campus in the country. And my students reflect not only the diversity of the campus, but they come from the socioeconomic groups hardest hit by the pandemic. Most are immigrants, nearly all are people of color, all are first generation college students, and all have struggled financially since the pandemic hit. So my students and I set out to think through the following proposition together. So as students of political science, and I would say for us, as people concerned about the well-being of others in the world, we have all learned for years about the structures and institutions of the US and the world, which order our lives and provide certain opportunities, but which also codify patterns of inequality and oppression that can feel difficult to escape. Our proposition in this course, which seemed especially apropos for this year and for today, was how, despite all the forces keeping us down, can we rise up and live ethical, happy, and productive lives? So today I draw from the insights we gleaned together, and I focus on, in particular, on the conversations we had around 3 books that we read. We read Man's Search for Meaning by psychologist Viktor Frankl. We read Make the Road by Walking by radical organizers and educators Paulo Freire and Miles Horton. And the book from which the first reading was taken is All About Love, again by Bell Hooks. So let me start with Viktor Frankl, who some of you, I know that my mother had read it when she was in school. None of my students had ever heard of it before I taught it. So what I want us to focus on first, again, is suffering is opportunity. So if anybody ever had the right to be despondent and to give up, it would be Viktor Frankl. He had a promising career in psychiatry and a young pregnant wife when he was sent to one of Hitler's concentration camps in 1942. His entire family would perish in these camps, and Frankl would endure 3 years before the camp where he was being held was liberated. While in the concentration camp, he reflected on what enabled some prisoners to endure suffering while others perished. He chronicled the different stages of adapting to unimaginably difficult circumstances, and talked about its shock and what was happening, apathy, and disillusionment. So I want to pause in terms of kind of the cycles of dealing with hardship. I want to pause on apathy because that spoke to me especially this year. So here's how he describes apathy. So apathy, the main symptoms of the second phase, was a necessary mechanism of self-defense. Reality dimmed, and all efforts and all emotions were centered on one task, preserving one's own life and that of the others. It was typical to hear prisoners while they were being herded back to camp from their work sites in the evening sigh with relief and say, well, another day is over, something I could identify with this year. It can be readily understood that such a state of strain, coupled with the constant necessity of concentrating on the task of staying alive, forced the prisoner's inner life down to a primitive level. Several of my colleagues in camp who were trained in psychoanalysis often spoke of a regression in their camp inmate, a retreat to a more primitive form of mental life. His wishes and desires became obvious in his dreams. What did the prisoner dream about most frequently? Of bread, cake, cigarettes, and nice warm baths. The lack of having these simple desires satisfied led him to seek wish fulfillment in dreams. Whether it did any good is another matter. For me, this reminded me of a recent morning after dreaming of hosting family in my new home for Christmas. I think this feeling of kind of, we know that the world is burning around us in many ways. But sorry, my dog was just let in. But even though we know things are chaotic all around us, what kind of occupies most of our mental energy is just the day-to-day logistics of getting through. For Frankl, he gleaned what he regarded as a universal truth. In suffering, in spiritual life could deepen. As one's exterior life becomes more and more empty and desolate, it's the inner life which could save a person and teach him anew about beauty and meaning. When there were glimpses of beauty, he and his fellow prisoners appreciated them as never before. For me, he really captured it. He talks about a journey on the prison carriage between Auschwitz and a Bavarian camp. And he said, if someone had seen our faces on that journey, as we beheld the mountains of Salzburg with their summits glowing in the sunset through the barred windows of the prison carriage, he would never have believed those were the faces of men who had given up all hope of life. So Frankl reflected on the roots of happiness, which he found lay in the quotidian, the choices which arise every day, every hour, which determined whether you would submit to your oppression, or whether you would assert your inner freedom. So for me, kind of, what is that really has gotten to me? And I think about what does it look like for me to assert my freedom every day? Is it kind of making sure I take the time to appreciate the beauty of nature, of deciding to step up to help my sister with childcare for of my nephews, who might hear in the background. Frankl talked about sharing the last morsel of bread with a fellow inmate dying of starvation, even as he himself was suffering from malnutrition. For him, in the smallest of choices, there is spiritual freedom. This is the core of what Frankl understood as happiness, and he advised his patients that happiness, therefore, is not something we aspire to. It's not something we chase, right? Rather, it is something that emerges in the daily practice of freedom. And the suffering which surrounds those choices is part of what makes them meaningful. So my student Javier was at first doubtful of this. He said, I had never encountered anyone that argues that there are opportunities in suffering and that we should not aim to be happy or successful. But this does make sense. Frankl's idea, again, this is Javier, Frankl's idea is that love and a positive outlook on the future can help you endure a difficult time. And that's part of what prison inmates clung to keep their spirits up. What makes my life the richest is when I am deciding to be good to people I love, usually when they and maybe me are having a hard time. In some, there's opportunity for joy, reflection, and love in suffering. Second, disruption as a change agent. So the disruptions to our daily routines and ways of being have been numerous and varied and dramatic, whether it is in the absence of loved ones for the holidays, the pause of going for walks with a friend or neighbor, or the rhythms of life. No more smiles to the person behind the counter when we buy something, or even if we are smiling, they can't see us behind our mask, even if they smile. So while these disruptions are true for all of us individually, as we know, we've had major disruptions to our society as well, right? Some of which, like the newfound consciousness around Black Lives Matter, we hope lead to broader social change. I want to talk today about one disruption that many of us have had to experience or have had to experience firsthand, which is the disruption to education, right? So I think before the pandemic hit, there was broad acceptance that the way that we have been conducting education in the United States hasn't been working for a long time. We know that the rote memorization kind of the 50s and 60s, or of kind of the long history of rote memorization in education hasn't served us well. There's kind of broad acceptance that something needs to change. So all of a sudden, for the first time, I'd say in educational history, we had a huge experiment that everybody took at the same time. We all went online. Before, efforts to go online had been dominated by um, charter schools or by online for-profit universities, basically for those who were pioneering online education, really with profit in mind, right? Rather than thinking about it as a some people in universities had been thinking about it as a way to democratize access to education, but we really hadn't had the kind of broad-based experiments with education that, with online learning that we have really seen since the pandemic hit. So what have we learned from this incredibly wide-reaching experiment with online education? I think that's one of the questions that I came into this course with. What I brought to my students was this book by Paulo Freire and Miles Horton, again, which is called "We Make the Road by Walking: Conversations about Education and Social Change." So, as some of you might know, Miles Horton ran the Highlander School, which was the most prominent civil rights training school, which actually trained Rosa Parks prior to her sitting down on the bus. As most of us know, she didn't just decide not to give up her seat. She was a plant in the best sense of the word. She had been trained at the Highlander School. It was decision of a movement that she would be the symbol. So Miles Horton was the person who founded that school. Paulo Freire, as some of you might know, worked in radical education in Brazil for a long time, figuring out how to democratize access to education, and figuring out how education could be a tool of social change rather than a tool of producing kind of tamed individuals ready to be part of the production line. So together, right before their death, they produced this beautiful book where they sit down and talk about all of the things that they've learned from a lifetime of being educators in social change. So at the center of what they argue is that education should be about helping people realize what they already know, right? That the essence of education is understanding the communities as an educator, is understanding the communities where you work, and how to help people realize the knowledge that they and their families already possess. So here's the reaction of one of my students to both that book and putting it in the context of our current moment. The student's name is Garen Hilton. He is a high school teacher who was getting his master's. He teaches high school social studies and a class in Black studies. So he says, "I'll never forget this year, not just because of the pandemic, because of the shift it had on education. While responsible for the cipher of one, it was reading Paulo Freire's take on the staleness of the authoritarian model and being a student in this class, walking down topics collectively with my peers and professor that made me rethink how I should conduct my classes. The absence of in-person learning made the need to restructure our current models more dire if our lessons were going to accomplish any of our objectives. Accepting limitations in the stale model of memorization became louder through the deafening silence that we heard while trying to maintain the techniques of old." So this year, it was more apparent than ever. If educators, in Freire's words, were simply reproducing dominant ideology with tasks the ruling class expects the teachers to accomplish, it won't work. The call for educators to serve us all better has been sounding for many years. Unexpectedly, the shakeup that online learning has brought to education may provide the disruption which true change needs to advance. Okay, finally, yearning as impetus. So as Bell Hooks says in her title, it is all about love. This book is revolutionary she claims it's revolutionary. I believe it is, to bring talking about love to the center of conversations, usually about politics and social change. She brings together conversations of love and faith and politics to inform kind of, we heard it in the opening readings. For me, again, the most poignant parts of that are the space of our lack is also the space of possibility. And as we yearn, we make ourselves ready to receive the love that is coming to us as gift, as promise, as earthly paradise. Say a little bit more about this reading in the words of my students. For my student Erin, for hooks, love is natural. That is not to say that it comes to us naturally. And though we must learn how to love and be loved, the struggle to do so can put us in touch with something spiritual, mystical, which is essential to our humanity, something which patriarchal, imperial, capitalist society is making increasingly difficult to obtain. Going back to Garen, the teacher. In what feels like a search for the soul rather than a game of the mind, Hooks writes firmly but openly about the transformative power of love. One is able to tap into this all-powerful resource at any point of one's journey if one is not afraid. So for me, if there's one word that captures so much of 2020, it is yearning. The yearning to be outside, to hug our loved ones, to celebrate with others, for my dream of hosting people to come true. And again, as we yearn, we make ourselves ready to receive the love that is coming to us. So to all of us and to myself, I want to ask us to close this difficult year by leaning in to what our yearnings reveal. What are the things you have missed most? How does knowing how much you value and yearn for that person, for that experience, teach you about how you want to refigure your life when things go back to normal? What are the ways that suffering can be an opportunity? That you can understand the disruptions as an opportunity for change? And what are the ways that the yearnings that you have can be an impetus to deeply value and center the things which are more important to you? Going back to Frankel, we have spiritual freedom to make meaningful choices in our daily lives. What will you do with this freedom today? Rather than yearning for happiness, how can your daily actions bring you and those around you fulfillment? As I'm walking with my freedom and I'm gonna go through. Thank you so much. We'll now do the effort.
An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. Another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous contribution via one of the options shown on this slide. You can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window to contribute, or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples on the slide show how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose or intent of your gift. And now we say goodbye to our Facebook friends. Consider joining us on Zoom next time by visiting albanyuu.org. Our offertory music is Santa Lucia, a traditional Neapolitan song with words by Teodoro Cotro, performed by Tanya Otalin. We enjoy welcoming guests and visitors to our service. If you are a guest or visitor and would like to tell us who you are and where you're from, you can click on the blue raise hand symbol in the participant window. Our technician will unmute you and invite you to speak. You may also, or instead, click on the visitor link you'll find now in the chat window. Do we have any guests or visitors today?
Not seeing any blue hands this morning. Nope.
Okay, well, thank you and welcome to all who have joined us today. If you'd like to learn more about our congregation or Unitarian Universalism, you can find in the participant window someone with welcome before their name. You can reach out to that person privately in the chat window now or after the service. We welcome the chance to greet each other. In our Zoom format, this is done through virtual breakout rooms. You can say hello and share your name. This will last about 2 minutes, and then we'll all come back together.
Interestingly, Sam, we were not invited to join a breakout room. We were just put in one. So something different. Anyway, all good.
Okay, joys and sorrows. Good morning. My name is Eric Von Hausen, and I'm the Pastoral Care Associate today. This is the time set aside in our service for sharing significant personal milestones in our lives. There are 3 ways to share a joy or a sorrow. The first option is to type your joy or sorrow into the chat window. Please put the words "read aloud" in the beginning of your message, and if you would like us to do that. Please also consider connecting privately in a chat window with a pastoral care associate. You may identify the ones on duty today in the participant window. Look for PCA before their name. The second option is to click the blue raise hand symbol in the participant window. Our technician will then unmute you and invite you to speak your joy or sorrow. The third option is to submit a joy or sorrow using the website by noon on Friday prior to the service. We'll begin by reading those that were submitted this past week. Then we'll hear the spoken joys and sorrows, followed by the chat entries that are read aloud. I have one that was submitted from Al DeSalvo. As we know, 2020 has been a uniquely terrible year for all of us. So with only 1 week to go before its bitter end, we would expect nothing less than more problems. On early Christmas morning, Susan awoke and walked into the dressing room area. She slipped on the floor and fractured her hip. She is now at St. Peter's. Luckily, the break was not high, which would have required a hip replacement. It was also not high enough to require a more invasive surgical procedure. Susan went into surgery on 26th December afternoon. The procedure is known as an open reduction internal fixation, ORIF, where a pin is inserted into the femur, which will stabilize the hip and allow it to heal. The surgery was successful. Yay. Next step for rehabilitation, which will commence tomorrow, the 27th of December, at the hospital for a couple of days. And it will be determined whether Susan can come home and continue at home rehab or have to go to a rehab facility. We are hoping for the former. Sorry to hear that.
I've got Winston and Deborah with a blue hand raised. If you can unmute yourself and share with us your joy or sorrow. There you go.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, it wasn't unmuting.
Yeah. So I did a little update of our announcement of a couple of weeks ago. Our daughter Heather and her fiance Jorg came from Abu Dhabi, quarantine. Christmas morning, we got the great news that the COVID tests were negative. And
yesterday we had a wedding.
got
So,
wonderful snow, just the right
just
amount.
perfect amount for an outdoor wedding.
Yes.
So, and we want to introduce, well, you know Heather, but here's
Both
just
Heather and
zooming in
yours.
from the virtual background, so.
Heather, who grew up in the church.
Wonderful experience. So thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
And it was a beautiful virtual Christmas service the 2 evenings before.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay. All right.
All right, thank you. And I don't think I see any other, let me see if there's any more blue hands. I don't see any more.
Okay, I'll do the read alouds. From Barb Manning, a longtime friend and employee of ours, Merle Wynn, died on Christmas Eve after a courageous fight with brain cancer. Please keep his family in your thoughts. From Lois Bailey, thoughts of sympathy to the families who have lost loved ones during these times, particularly the unrelenting COVID deaths. From Chuck Manning, we learned this morning that Merle Wynn, one of our former friends and employees, died on Christmas Eve. That's the same as the other one. From Karen Coffin, my sorrow is for the millions of Americans who are needlessly suffering even more because of the inexplicable failure of the president to sign the relief bill. From Jay Holly, my mom's assisted living in Virginia has had no cases of COVID until this week. 4 residents have been admitted to the hospital. So far, my mom has tested negative and has no symptoms. Please send prayers and positive thoughts her way. From Carolyn Bradley, my sister-in-law Dottie and her grandson Cole both have COVID. This puts my brother Chet at a great risk. Please pray for all. From Anne-Marie Haber. Annie Metzger's father died this week. It was very sudden and unexpected. This was a shock for Annie and her family. And from Molly Daniels, my nephew wound up with a collapsed lung and required emergency surgery. Please join me in wishing for a speedy recovery. My niece is also in rehab again. Her children is in foster care. Her children in foster care and her husband has left her. Wishes for peace during this tough time. That seems to be it. I've also been asked to do the prayer of affirmation today. And to honor the winter solstice on December 21st, I am reading from our hymnal, number 446, Pagan Prayer to the Four Directions. As an Episcopalian growing up, I loved ritual, and Betsy Miller taught me this in Wellspring, so shout out to Betsy Miller. Normally we would face each direction as we pray, but for Zoom, I'll face the camera. Spirit of the East, spirit of air, of morning and springtime, be with us as the sun rises in times of beginning, in times of planting. Inspire us with the fresh breath of courage as we go forth into new adventures. Spirit of the South, spirit of fire, of noontime and summer, be with us through the heat of the day and help us to be ever growing. Warm us with strength and energy for the work that awaits us. Spirit of the West, spirit of water, of evening and autumn, be with us as the sun sets and help us to enjoy our rich harvest. Flow through us with a cooling, healing quietness and bring us peace. Spirit of the North, spirit of earth, of nighttime and winter, be with us in the darkness and the time of gestation. Ground us in the wisdom of the changing seasons as we celebrate the spiraling journey of our lives. May it be so.
As we extinguish the chalice, please join in the words shown on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
The closing benediction from number 681 in our gray hymnal. Deep peace of the running wave to you. Deep peace of the flowing air to you. Deep peace of the quiet earth to you. Deep peace of the shining stars to you. Deep peace of the infinite peace to you. Adapted from Gaelic.
Thank you, Janice. And our thanks also go to our ushers, Kristen Abbas, Dawn Dana, Dick Dana, and Chuck Manning. Our pastoral care associates, Eric Van Housen and Donna Meixner. Our welcomer, Barb Manning. I'm your service associate. Our musicians, Elena Karpov and Tanya Hotalin, and Sapphire Correa for our office support. And now some announcements. To receive our news via email, contact Tammy Hathaway, admin@albanyuu.org. Please remain on after the service for our informal coffee hour and conversation. At 11:30 today, our RE for All will be an adult discussion. Children are off this week. You can join the congregational discussion with Janice on Zoom too. And I think you'll be able to find that link in your chat. And join us tomorrow, Monday, December 28th at 6:30 p.m. for a multi-generational virtual game night. For more information, you can visit the website. And now we invite you to join a breakout room for conversation and fellowship. And you can click to accept the breakout room assignment when it appears on your screen.
I think we're still recording, Sam.
Thank you for